Donald Trump just came back from his first tour abroad, and his theme that he played over and over again to all of the foreign countries was America First. And that got me to thinking where I'd heard that term before, and it goes back to the 30s. Does everybody know who Charles Lindbergh was?
Yeah.
He's a flyboy.
Lucky Lindy.
Flew a plane over the Atlantic Ocean, landed in Paris, and they thought he was a big hero as a result of that. This isn't about his plane flight. Also, in order to kind of get some of the references, in this song, which was done by Woody Guthrie, and it's titled Mr. Charlie Lindbergh, refers to Wheeler, Clark, and Nye. Those were U.S. senators that were sitting at the time, and if you just think Mitch McConnell, Ted Cruz, and Orrin Hatch, you'll get a pretty close estimation of the guys to which he's referring. And also later on he talks about Father Coughlin. So if you just think so if you just think a combination of Alex Jones and Rush Limbaugh, you'd have a pretty fair approximation. So we have Mr. Charlie Lindbergh by Woody Guthrie. Now, Mr. Charlie Lindbergh, he flew to old Berlin, got him a big iron cross, and he flew right back again to Washington. Mrs. Charlie Lindbergh, she came dressed in red, said, "I'd like to sleep in that pretty White House bed in Washington. Lindy said to Annie, "We'll get there by and by, but we'll have to split the bed up with Wheeler, Clark, and Nye in Washington. Hitler wrote to Lindy. He said, "Do your very worst." Lindy started an outfit that he called America First in Washington. All around the country, Lindbergh he did fly. Gasoline was paid for by Hoover, Clark, and Nye in Washington. Lindy said to Hoover, "We'll do the same as France. Make a deal with Hitler and then we'll get our chance in Washington. Then they had a meeting, and all the firsters came on a walk, and they came on a run in Washington. Yonder comes Father Coughlin wearing the silver chain, gassed on his stomach and Hitler on the brain in Washington. Mr. John L. Lewis would sit and straddle a fence, but his daughter signed with Lindbergh, and we ain't seen her since in Washington. Hitler said to Lindy, "Stall him if you can. Gonna bomb Pearl Harbor with the help of old Japan in Washington. Then on a December morning, the bombs came from Japan. Wake Island and Pearl Harbor killed 1,500 men in Washington. Now Lindy tried to join the army, but they wouldn't let him in, afraid he'd sell to Hitler a few more million men in Washington. So I'm going to tell you people, if Hitler's going to be beat, the common working people has got to take the seat in Washington. And I'm going to tell you workers, before you cash in your checks, they say America first, but they mean America's next in Washington.